Is-sena tajba, sinjuri, grazzi li qed issegwu il-programm. Ix-xandira llum qed issir mill-Parlament ta' Malta, mill-Kamra tal-Oppożizzjoni fej sankellmu lid-deputat l-Onorevoli Graham Bencini li huwa Shadow Minister tal-Finanzi. Jekk tixtiequ taraw il-Graham Bencini jitkellem bil-Malti dwar l-istess suġġetti, segwu Net Live fuq Net TV. Graham, thank you very much for welcoming us to Parliament and for agreeing to speak to us about public funds. Where can we start?
Thank you, Leah. It's a pleasure once again to be discussing this topic, and for once in English. Where can we start with? Well, that's a good question, because if I had to mention all the scandals involving the misuse of public funds, I would never stop. But what I can tell you is what I mentioned in Parliament in my last speech, in my reply to the Finance Minister's speech. And amongst other things, I gave a few examples of how this government is misusing and squandering public funds. I mentioned, for example, the case when the patrol boat of the Armed Forces of Malta was purchased, where they exceeded the budget by 14 million. I mentioned the case of the National Park in Ta'ali, which was originally estimated to cost us 20 million and eventually cost the public 80 million. So they exceeded the budget by 60 million. There were also cases where the budget on the new pool in Cottonera exceeded the budget by 7 million. There was also the projects of the pool in Gozo, which once again exceeded the budget by 7 million. And I can go on and mention all these figures, which prove that this Labour government finds it very easy to misuse, mismanage and squander public funds without giving us any explanation on what they are spending, or should I say overspending the public funds. Recently we had another scandal whereby the Minister of Gozo, Clint Camilleri, who is synonymous nowadays with scandals, has overshot the budget on a road in Nadur by 10.5 million euros. For them, millions means nothing, you know, but then they expect the people to be happy if they give them a pittance. And this brings me to another point which relates to the budget, because in the budget, as you can imagine, being the Shadow Minister of Finance, I had multiple interviews. And in most of my interviews, they asked me about the tax cuts which the government had announced, because we heard various weeks of propaganda by Prime Minister Robert Abela telling us that the tax cuts are going to be historic tax cuts that are going to change people's lives. And I'm on record saying that I disagree, that they're going to change people's lives, and in fact, they're not going to have much of an effect on people's lives.
And why is that? Why is that?
Because when you study the tax cuts, you see that the people who pay the least tax are going to save approximately 30 euros per month with the new tax rates.
Which is €1 a day.
Which is €1 a day. And the ones that pay the most are going to save approximately 55 or 60 euros a month. Now, I did not dismiss the tax cuts because I'm in favor in all cases where tax is reduced, like a nationalist government had done in the past, which was beneficial, and so I'm not going to say they're not beneficial because they are beneficial, but when you try and fool people, as this Labour government is constantly trying to do, you know, I cannot just sit idly and just play along to the tune of Robert Abela. And so I said, listen, it's not going to make a big difference. And my views were echoed by other experts in the industry who are non-political. They have no interest in any political party. They just speak facts.
Such as?
I had mentioned a professional. And I had also brought up his article whereby he's a payroll expert. And this payroll expert said that these tax cuts are well beyond the due date, so they had to happen before. So it's good that they're happening, but listen, there's nothing extravagant about these tax cuts. And when you see that people who are paying the least tax are going to save €30 a month, now let's be honest, is €30 a month going to change anyone's life?
Even €30 a week won't, really.
Exactly. So, you know, so when you're seeing the inflation rate, which has gone down, but it's still above the average medium inflation rate of the EU, then you're saying, listen, let's be honest. Let's for once be honest with people and say, look, listen, we'll give you a tax cut, but don't try and fool them and try and make them believe that they're giving them something extraordinary when in reality you're not. What is extraordinary is when the minister's wife, the ex-tourism minister's wife, has given a €70,000 contract for a job she's not qualified and not even doing, as we have seen in the Standards Commissioner's report. What's extravagant is when, according to the Times of Malta, we read about the scandal once again involving the former tourism minister's wife, where allegedly she received a €50,000 kickback from a deal involving the Malta Tourism Authority. So the same authority her husband used to be the minister for and therefore was responsible for. This was also in the Times of Malta. This is what is extravagant, not the pittance which the government gives to the public and tries to sell it as though it is something historic, when in actual fact it is not historic.
Sure.
And it was my take on the budget, and obviously, as you can expect, the Labour Party hasn't stopped attacking me, which is not going to bother me, mind you. Frankly, they can say what they want. And I can assure you, I'm going to continue speaking my mind immaterial of what the Labour Party or Robert Abela say or do.
U issa sa ngħaddu għal servizz ta' Net News.
€174,000 daqshekk qed iddaħħal kull sena fil-but l-eks Ministru Laburista Justin Caruana minn 4 impjiegi, xogħol li suppost jammonta għal madwar 120 siegħa fil-ġimgħa. Dan ġie żvelat minn The Shift News fejn ġie spjegat ix-xogħol li suppost qed tagħmel Justin Caruana f'kuntratti li ġew approvati bil-barka tal-Prim Ministru Robert Abela. Caruana hija l-unika membru parlamentari fl-istorja ta' pajjiżna li ġiet imkeċċija darbtejn mill-Kabinett fl-istess leġislatura u fl-aħħar impjieg li ngħatat Justin Caruana kien mad-Dipartiment tat-Taxxa fejn intgħażlet għal din il-konsulenza permezz ta' direct order qasam li fih l-eks Ministru m'għandha l-ebda esperjenza u li għalih qed titħallas €78,000 fis-sena għal 30 siegħa xogħol fil-ġimgħa. Apparti minn hekk Justin Caruana qed titħallas €3,000 fix-xahar talli qed isservi ta' avukat f'isem l-Awtorità tal-Ippjanar Fawdex kif ukoll bħala konsulenta fil-Ministeru tas-Saħħa b'20 siegħa għal kull job fil-ġimgħa. Hija ġiet impjegata wkoll bħala person of trust fejn qed titħallas €20,000 fis-sena, apparti l-allowances żejda li qed titħallas qed tirċievi wkoll €40,000 oħra fis-sena bħala senior legal officer fil-Victim Support Agency. L-impjieg fil-Victim Support Agency huwa l-unika wieħed li ngħatat wara li saret sejħa uffiċjali b'Caruana applikat ġimgħa biss wara li tkeċċiet mill-Kabinett fl-2021. Permezz ta' dawn l-4 impjiegi l-eks Ministru Laburista Justin Caruana qed titħallas xejn inqas minn €15,000 fix-xahar. L-ewwel darba li Caruana kellha tirreżenja kien lura fl-2020 propju wara li ġie żvelat li l-eks assistent kummissarju tal-Pulizija Silvio Valletta li kien ir-raġel ta' Ġustin Karwana kellu ħbiberija man-negozjant Jorgin Fenek imbagħad finqas minn sena wara ġiet appuntata bħala Ministru tal-Edukazzjoni minn Roberta Vela iżda tkeċċiet wara li tat kuntratt irregolari ta' 15,000 euro lis-sieħeb tagħha.
I'd like to go back to where we started and the misuse of public funds, because you mentioned that the government's exceeding the budget, spending over the budget, and you also mentioned the word squandering,
Yeah.
and then you went on to speak about other scandals. But there is a difference between scandals and mismanagement.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, if we can focus on the mismanagement, and that's where Minister Clyde Karwana comes in. Why is this happening?
However, one doesn't exclude the other.
No. But if we can just focus on the mismanagement first, because we hear more about the scandals, and perhaps we can start with the mismanagement, because they're two very different things.
Very different, and in a way they're related.
They're related,
Because,
for
you know,
sure
when you're
they're
squandering
related.
public funds on these phantom jobs,
Absolutely.
like, for example, the one which the former tourism minister's wife had, you know, that is squandering of public funds.
Absolutely, that is.
And
And,
it becomes a scandal because we got to know about it. And we got to know the reason
yes.
about it. So when you are seeing, for example, for me, when you exceed the budget by 60 million on a garden, that's scandalous. Now, when
But
you are not
why
given,
is it happening? Why is it happening?
we don't know, because when we ask for details, they won't give us the information.
But as somebody who's got the purse strings, isn't that your primary focus?
Yes, it
to not to exceed your budget.
What worries me is the extent by which they exceed the budget, because in various scenarios there can be situations where a budget is exceeded, because we have to remember that a budget is a projection. Now, when you project an expense, you meant to get it quite fairly accurate, but there can be situations where you overshoot your budget, but certainly you don't overshoot a budget by 60 million. You don't overshoot a budget by 14 million. So why it is happening, I don't know, because when we ask for information, they don't tell us. But what is certain is that, one, it's unacceptable, and two, it's certainly concerning, and three, there's something certainly wrong somewhere, because you don't make a budget, I'm going to mention the garden again, of 20 million, and you end up spending 80 million. I mean, if you had to overshoot the budget by 1 million, I'd be concerned, but I would say, look, you know, it can happen. But when you make a budget of 20 million and you end up spending 80, then there's something certainly wrong somewhere. Now, I cannot make any sweeping statements. I cannot point my finger at anything or anyone. I'm just speaking about facts, and as you know, I only speak about facts. I don't like speculating, I don't like assuming, but without wanting to, I mean, it would certainly cross your mind that something wrong is happening somewhere. Mm-hmm. And why are they spending so much money over the budget? Where are these funds going? And these are the questions we want to have answered. These are the questions they don't answer. Mm-hmm. And this is what would concern me as finance minister. And I'm surprised that the finance minister doesn't have anything to say about it, because it's not the first time that the Net News journalists have asked this question to the finance minister, and he basically brushes them off and says that he's not responsible for the manner in which other ministers spend their budget. He just allocates the budget and it's up to the minister to spend it. Well, I disagree, because if I'm going to allocate a budget to a minister and he is overspending it by various millions, then I'm certainly going to have to look into the matter and see where these public funds are going, because ultimately the government is there to administer the public funds. The public funds are not the property of the Labour government, although they think and they make it feel as though it is that way, because when they give out something in a budget, you are giving out people's funds, people's taxes.
Can we still focus on Minister Clyde Karwana, because he's the finance minister, and that's your area, in relation to the spending by, let's say, for example, there was Vitals, that was Vitals and Stewards. That was under his watch, really. And now a more recent case of Minister Clayton Bartolow's wife. How do you envisage that he could actually control his spend in areas like this? Because these are scandals, they're not mismanagement.
These are scandals, yes, but ultimately, as we were saying before, the mismanagement of funds can also be a scandal in itself.
Yes, but we can't comment about that.
We can't comment about that because we don't know the information and they don't like speculating, don't like assuming, but ultimately you do tend to get bad thoughts about the way in which these funds are being spent. Because, as I was saying, it's not normal to exceed the budget by so many millions. Now, how can he control it? Ultimately, he is responsible, the finance minister is responsible for the country's finances. If I had to have a colleague, a minister, who is exceeding his budget by various millions, I'm not going to look favorably upon it. You know, now ultimately it's going to be a colleague of mine, if it had to be in the same cabinet. But, you know, I would certainly look into the matter, would question at least what is happening. And as the finance minister, the buck stops with him. So anything relating to the use of public funds ultimately is the responsibility of the finance minister. And therefore, even in cases like, for example, the funds transferred to Stewart Healthcare, first there was Vitals and there was Stewart Healthcare, ultimately, the finance minister certainly had his finger on the button of processing this particular transaction. Now, I'm not saying that he was involved in anything untoward in these deals, just to be very clear. But he was the person who was processing these transactions, or approving the transfer of public funds. So even there must be some responsibility to be carried. Although he has not been mentioned so far in the court cases which we are seeing unfold in the law courts of Malta, the finance minister is the person who gives the final go-ahead to the transfer of these funds.
But his predecessor, Professor Scicluna, had to resign.
Yeah.
And then had a new job at the central bank. But how do you think this is going to end up with Minister Clyde Caruana?
Well, I don't know, we have to wait and see. As I was saying, so far he has not been implicated, so that's something very important to mention. You mentioned Professor Edward Scicluna, and you said that he had to resign as finance minister. Well, he should have also resigned as the governor of the central bank, but he refused to do so because Edward Scicluna is more interested in looking out for his own interests and not for anyone else's interests. It was absurd having a central governor, the governor of the Central Bank of Malta, charged in court as Edward Scicluna is charged, and he wanted to retain his post and not resign in the interest of the country's reputation. I mean, that tells you quite a bit about the person. With regard to Clyde Caruana, I mean, we'll have to wait and see how this unfolds. I don't know, I'm not going to speculate, so I can't tell you more than that.
You're very active on the Public Accounts Committee. Can you update us with what is going on?
In the Public Accounts Committee, incidentally, before this last topic used to be very followed. The government chose the topic, which followed the one of the opposition. And just to remind everybody, the previous topic was the electrogas investigation. This was carried over from the previous legislature, which was an opposition topic. We carried it forward and we shelved it for the time being. And then the government chose its topic, which it wanted to investigate in the Public Accounts Committee, and that was the investment of government funds in sports entities. That now is also concluded, and so now is the opposition's turn to choose the next topic to be investigated at the Public Accounts Committee. And as the opposition members, we, the three of us, so Darren Karabot as chairman, Claudette Buttigieg and myself, who are the three opposition members on the Public Accounts Committee, have chosen to investigate the latest National Auditor's Office reports with regards to the spending of public funds in the Film Commission.
Aktar kontroversji wara li it-Times żvelat kif il-Gvern tajjar €500,000 biex qabbad direttur barrani u tim ta' 130 persuna jipproduċu video qasir għal Mediterranean Film Festival. Apparti il-fatt li Grek issa spiċċa jirrexxa f'dan il-film, esperti fl-industrija jinsabu xxukkjati kif il-Kummissjoni tal-Films issib l-eluf biex fi kliemhom tiddandan mal-barranin. Fil-fatt, atturi u producers li tkellmu magħna qalulna li dan il-video ma offra ebda valur miżjud lis-serata tal-Mediterranean Film Festival, ħlief li kien pjattaforma għal Johan Grek biex jerġa' jippoppa mal-komiku David Walliams. Buħud mill-atturi Maltin jiddikjaraw li Grek biddel lilu nnifsu f'ċajta nazzjonali. Sorsi qed jgħidu li dan il-film bl-isem Once Upon a Time in Malta sewa €500,000 lill-Kaxxa ta' Malta u fih Williams u Grek imorru lura fi żmien għall-epoka tal-Kavallieri. Dan il-video intwera fis-serata finali tal-Film Awards li saret f'Manuel Island. Bis-sit Love in Malta jgħid li Grek qed jilagħba qisu George Clooney.
And we will also be tying that up to the spend of the ministries of the former tourism minister and the Gozo ministry, who is Clint Camilleri, seeing that they were both involved in what you can say arguably the latest, largest scandal the country had to face. We will start investigating it the moment Parliament resumes, which will be happening shortly.
Meta jirġa' jibda jintaqa' l-Parlament fis-sena l-ġdida, il-Kumitat Permanenti dwar il-Kontijiet Pubbliċi se jkollu qudiemu investigazzjoni ġdida li mistennija titfa' aktar dawl fuq dak li kien għaddej fil-Ministeru għat-Turiżmu u fil-Ministeru għal-Għawdex bejn is-sena 2020 u din is-sena. Dan fid-dawl tal-iskandlu tal-eks Ministru għat-Turiżmu Clayton Bartolo u tal-Ministru għal-Għawdex Clint Camilleri li jitnejn instabu ħatja li wettqu frodi bi flus il-poplu meta taw ġob bħala konsulenta lil mara ta' Clayton Bartolo, konsulenza fantasma fejn itħallset ma' €70,000 mit-taxxi tal-poplu. Din l-investigazzjoni se ssir għal il-Partit Nazzjonalista se jkun itressa quddiem il-PAC, ir-rapport li ħareġ l-Awditur Ġenerali f'Novembru li għadda, waqt li l-Kumitat se jintalab ukoll jeżamina il-kontijiet tal-awtoritajiet governattivi u entitajiet parastatali li jaqgħu taħt dawn iż-żewġ ministeri għal perjodu ta' 5 snin bejn l-2020 u l-2024. War li nkixef il-frodi li konfoffaw bejnietom l-eks Ministru Clayton Bartolo u l-Ministru Clint Camilleri, l-Awditur Ġenerali investiga nefqa ta' miljuni mill-Malta Film Commission. L-Awditur Ġenerali sab fost l-oħrajn il-Kummissjoni Maltija tal-Films ma kellix bażi soda ta' strateġija u business plans dwar in-nefqa fil-Malta Film Week li ma provdiċ records ta' accounts u kuntratti tant li l-Awditur Ġenerali ma setax jasal għan nefqa sħiħa ta' kemm swiet il-Malta Film Week. Sab ukoll il-Kummissjoni tal-Films kellha nuqqasijiet fil-governanza tajba u li saħansitra ma provdix l-Awditur Ġenerali bil-minuti u ma taċ dettalji seri tan-nefqa li saret fil-Malta Film Week. Għaldaqstant il-Partit Nazzjonalista jemmen f'investiment bi pjan strateġiku u mill-aqwa fl-industrija tal-films kemm għal produzzjonijiet lokali iżda wkoll sabiex pajjiżna jkun attrajenti għal produzzjonijiet barranin.
Graham, you mentioned the NAO report. What are your comments about the lack of investment in the prisons?
Before I get to that, I want to say that the NAO draws up many interesting reports, which unfortunately never see the light of day. I mean, they're presented in Parliament, and they do a lot of work, very interesting work, very thorough investigations when they're given the information. And I would just like to comment about the fact that it's a pity we don't get to investigate more of their reports because their work is truly outstanding in most cases. With regards to the prison, yes, of course, it's also mentioned in one of the reports. I believe it is a bit concerning, the lack of investment, especially when you see the way in which funds are being squandered. And this is why it starts getting worrying, because if we start managing our funds more responsibly, then we'll have more money in which to invest. Like, for example, in this case, in the state of the prisons, which from what we are seeing, especially in the media, thankfully I have never been there. I was invited in my former days when I used to play football. I was invited to play in the prison grounds against the inmates. And that was my only experience I got to see of the prison facility. But from what we read in the media, it's shameful, and it certainly needs investments to up the standards to a humane condition.
Earlier you brought up electrogas. What was the outcome?
Well, we had done a lot of work, which we continued on the good work which was done with the previous Public Accounts Committee with the previous legislature. And the previous legislature, the Public Accounts Committee used to be chaired by Beppe Fenekadami, and there used to be Carola Colina and Ryan Callus on that Public Accounts Committee, and they started the investigation. That done a lot of work on the investigation of the electric contract. When we had the new legislature, the Public Accounts Committee composition was changed, and we carried on the work which was done in the previous legislature. And as many people saw, because they used to follow the thousands, the live recordings, we exposed a number of questionable dealings in this contract, and we have shelved it for the time being because we had exhausted what we had to say up until then. It's shelved, and as we said before, we'll be now concentrating on a new subject when Parliament resumes.
I am energized, of course I am energized. X'kien nara lilek qudiemi, int ma tistax kellimni li fuq l-affarijiet, int ma tistax titkellem dwari, inti jiena qiegħed hawnhekk wiċċi minn quddiem il-poplu Malti Ewropej, imma jiena nkun hemm nivvota bil-qalb ta' kontrikom, jiena nkun hemmhekk nivvota bil-qalb kontrikom biex int ma tkunx fil-gvern.
L-iskandlu huwa kbir, il-provi jippuntaw lejn Kastilja iżda fi stqarrija ta' ftit linji l-Partit Laburista fl-ebda ħin ma appella biex tiġi ppubblikata l-inkjesta ta' 17 Black u l-proċess li analizza dan l-iskandlu tal-Power Station tal-gas f'Delli Mara. Il-Labour qal biss li l-proċeduri legali għandhom jitħallew jieħdu l-perkors tagħhom. Apparti minn hekk, il-Partit Laburista qed jimplika li Keith Kembri u Konrad Mizzi bħal donnom qatt ma kienu parti mill-gvern. Wara li ħarġet l-aħbar li ġiet konkluża l-inkjesta 17 Black, il-kap tal-Partit Nazzjonalista Bernard Grech saħaq illi issa nafu bil-provi illi l-proġett tal-Power Station tal-Electrogas ma kienx dwar l-enerġija iżda dwar il-korruzzjoni, maħdum mill-ogħla esponenti tal-Partit Laburista fosthom Konrad Mizzi u Keith Kembri taħt l-istruzzjonijiet ta' Joseph Muscat flimkien ma' nies bħal Jorgen Fenech u oħrajn. Din il-klikka ifrodat lil poplu b'kuntratt li jiswa 450 miljun euro. Bernard Grech insista li Robert Abela issa għandu obbligu ċar li jieħu azzjoni immedjata u jiżgura li dak li nstraqna jiġi ritornat lil poplu. Dan fil-waqt li l-Avukat Ġenerali għandu obbligu li tippubblika l-inkjesta maġisterjali sħiħa biex il-poplu Malti Wawċi ikun jaf il-verità kollha wara snin sħaħ ta' ċaħdiet minn dawk kollha implikati f'din is-serqa.
Int mort il-Parliament but
Ma mort il-kien. Can I explain this, please?
Error of judgment, a very calculated risk għabilt int. A very calculated risk.
Let me explain this,
Mela
please.
error of judgment.
Can I explain this without
Ħadd ma
interruptions,
jemnek,
please?
Konrad, hemm barra m'hemm ħadd qed jemnek. Konrad, ipprova fehma di, għalġit tiegħek. Hemm barra m'hemm ħadd qed jemnek.
Dr. Finnegan.
Meta inti tajt illi jiena mort għamilt il-kumpanija il-Panama biex nitfa' l-assets tiegħi id-dar ta' Malta u ta' Londra u kiex tiegħek u biex tiegħek, ma tagħmilx sens. Kull min għandu daqsxejn merħ f'moħħu u jħares lejk jinduna li int qed tikdeb. Meta inti tipprova tipperswadi li n-nies hemm barra, qed titratta n-nies ta' imbeċilli. U n-nies mhumiex imbeċilli, ma ħadd hemm barra, ħadd la fil-partit tiegħek, la fil-partit tagħna, la fil-partit ta' Coco Pardo, la dawk li m'għandhomx partit li qed jemnek, Ministru.
Huwa minnu kan.
Tifhimha di,
Li ħadd mhux jemnek.
ħadd mu qed jemnek.
Intant il-professur Endrozzo Pardi stqarr li dawk illi f'dajnihom imexxulna pajjiżna serquna f'wiċċna bla xeba, bla skrupli, bla mistħija, mhux darba, mhux tnejn, mhux euro, mhux tnejn. Miegħu inaqdu oħrajn illi fakru kif il-gvern daħħalna f'din ix-xibka ta' skandli.
And what are your thoughts on Malta's economic model? It's been discussed a lot. Do you think it should be changed? And how hard would it be to reverse it? Do you believe that it's right now, the way that it's being done?
It's an interesting question because I've discussed this many times during the budget weeks on these various debates that I had with the finance minister. And I like speaking the truth, although when I speak the truth, Super One cuts small clips of what I say and then, just distorts totally what I would have said and tries to patch up a new clip to try and give it a different meaning. But ultimately, people know the truth out there. People know what Super One does. I'm not going to continue speaking the way I do. And with regard to the economic model, we cannot deny that it has left beneficial effects on paper with regards to the gross domestic product of the country. Because statistically, our gross domestic product has grown year on year. But this had come at a cost. And what was this cost? This cost was that our standard of living, our quality of life has dropped dramatically over the past years, and this is statistically proven. We have seen various problems, such as the problems on the electricity grid. We've seen various power cuts, and this is due to the fact that there was a lack of investment in the electricity network and demand has substantially increased. So obviously, if you don't invest enough, you're going to have the power cuts which we had this past summer and the one before. We're seeing the strain that it's having on the hospital. We're seeing the strain it's having on our traffic. And we're seeing the manner in which our population has grown over the years. And these causes problems. They cause problems because we're a limited country. Our territory is limited. We're a small island, so our land is what it is. And if you continue increasing this population year on year, obviously the problem is going to get worse. Worse than this, and this is something I also mentioned in Parliament during my speech, during my last speech in Parliament, is when you see that in 2023, the Valletta Soup Kitchen alone, the Valletta Soup Kitchen, in 1 year, served over 125,000 meals. And for those who don't know what a soup kitchen serves free meals to those people who either have no roof over their head or else are not managing to make ends meet and don't have the funds to feed themselves. 125,000 meals means that the Valletta Soup Kitchen alone, in 2023, served almost 30,000 people. So when you have a government boasting of the economic success it has had year on year, it doesn't coincide with the realities we are seeing on the ground, because if we are having such big successes in our economic model, then why is it that we are having to resort to soup kitchens to feed over 30,000 people in 1 year? So something which is wrong somewhere. We've also seen, and this is also a statistical report, that the income distribution inequality is growing year on year. And just for the benefit of those who are following us, income distribution inequality means that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And this gap keeps on increasing. Now, across Europe, the trend is going down. So across Europe, the gap between those who earn the most and those who earn the least is closing.
So it's leveling out. Huh?
It's leveling out, except in 4 countries, and Malta is one of those 4 countries. And this is worrying, because when you have a model which is resulting in growing GDP year on year, you have the Valletta Soup Kitchens dishing out the over 120,000 meals in 1 year, feeding 30,000 people. You have the people who are at risk of poverty, and they also mentioned this, which is a worrying statistic, where we see that 20,000 children in Malta and Gozo under the age of 18 are living at risk of poverty. 20,000 children. This is statistically proven by the NSO. So what I'm saying, I'm just quoting an official statistic.
Għandek ħafna nies li qed jgħixu fil-faqar, sfortunatament, għandek immaġina ftit mal-200 tifel u tifla illi jiddependu minn dan il-post għaliex il-ġenituri tagħhom m'għandhomx flus biex jitmawhom. Jagħtu diversi servizzi oħra apparti dak tal-ikel u naħseb meta rajt illi qed jagħtu dan il-kontribut qegħdin jagħmlu dan il-mirakli jiena rajt kuljum delli illi għandhom jiġu nominati. Naturalment wieħed irid jaħseb ukoll aħna bħala politiċi li biex nkollok bżonn postijiet bħal dawn, bħal dan is-soup kitchen, ifisser li s-sistema qed tfalli. Ma jistax ikun il-pajjiż ħalli persentaġġ tal-popolazzjoni tagħna taqa' f'dan il-livell. Naħseb irridu nappellawha u permessa dan il-premju wkoll biex il-gvern jagħmel ħiltu kollha iktar milli qiegħed jagħmel biex ma nħallux in-nies jaqgħu fil-livell f'dan il-livell ta' faqar.
when you're seeing all these figures, there's something which is not making sense. And this is what we are saying. We are saying that, okay, it's left its mark on the GDP, but we've also seen that the country's debt has exploded, where today our debt is over 10 billion. It's projected to grow up by 2027. And when your debt is increasing, you're also paying a higher interest rates to service the debts. Loans are expensive to keep, debt is expensive to finance. And it results that by 2027, our country is going to be paying approximately 1 million euros a day in interest repayments. So as you are saying, when you see all these things together, you're saying, so our economic model isn't that successful as they try and make us believe it is. And so what are we saying as the Nationalist Party? We're saying, listen, we need to continue growing our economy year on year, because we cannot afford as a country to have the economy stalling at any stage, but we need to change the manner in which we are doing things, because this economic model, which is based on increasing numbers year on year, is having a detrimental effect on people's quality of life. And this can't continue, because if an economic model is not improving your life, but it is leading to a deterioration of your life, then obviously it's not beneficial. So we are saying, look, we need to have a new economic model which is going to continue giving us the growth, but it is going to improve our quality of life. It is going to reduce the people who are at risk of poverty, going to close the income inequality gap, and ultimately the benefits of this economic model which will reach more people. And we're saying that it's about time that we shift once again to a model which is based on quality rather than quantity.
What do you propose? Would you propose to do it?
Now, if we look back, if history has taught us anything, and I don't really like looking at the past because, I mean, it's pointless. I like looking at the future, but I'm going to mention this just to make a point about what I'm going to say next. If we look at the past, a previous nationalist government had already embarked on this change in economic model when it had created the various sectors which are beneficial up until today. Like, for example, the financial services sector, the gaming sector, the funds sector, the pharmaceutical sector, the banking industry, maritime and aviation industries. These were all created under a nationalist administration. And now it's time to do the same thing. Now, so we're saying, look, let us shift to better quality, to value-added sectors. Like nowadays we hear a lot about artificial intelligence. We believe that we can create new niches based on artificial intelligence, and there are other industries like fintech and so on and so forth. And this is what we are saying, that we are saying that we need to keep on growing, but we cannot continue increasing our population. We have nothing, absolutely nothing against any nationality or what have you. Our point is that since we have a limited territory, as I was saying before, our population has to be controlled.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is logic. Mm-hmm. So if we have a model based on population growth, then it's obvious we have to change it. And the only way in which you can change it and continue going forward economically is by shifting to a quality-based model and going for sectors which have more value added than the ones that are currently contributing to this growth.
Do you believe that Malta is a gateway into Europe for third country nationals?
Well, it can be a gateway into Europe, certainly. I mean, like any country
because
can
it's an easy entry into Malta.
Malta and Italy, so the countries that are at the periphery of Europe, because if you have the United States, I mean, those will have different issues. But when you see countries like Malta and Italy, which are basically the first port of call, if you want, from the African continent, then one would obviously come to the conclusion that it's easier to get there.
But what about the importation of labor? That's what I'm speaking about, really.
The importation of labor.
Because it seems that people come here to learn English, but quite a lot of them don't attend the schools and
I think we have
remain
to...
here. But I mean, they're doing it in a legal way.
Yes, I think we have to be a bit responsible when we speak about these people, because ultimately we're speaking about people, and we cannot forget that. The country needs a certain amount of third country nationals in certain sectors. I hope the government has a study on which sectors need third country nationals and other non-Maltese people. And I hope the government also has a study which states that certain sectors are employing too many of these people. Because if we have these studies, then we can take the necessary decisions which need to be taken. Without certain studies, you're acting in the dark and obviously you won't take the right decisions. So certain people are contributing successfully to certain industries. I can mention a few, like the medical industry.
Nursing.
Which includes nursing. We are also seeing nowadays, even in the financial services industry, where third country nationals are being employed because of a lack of human resources. So it is of utmost importance that we continue attracting these to our country in those sectors where we need them badly. In other sectors, however, it doesn't make any sense continuing to bloat the employments of certain people unless we absolutely need them. And this is what the government has to do, because we don't have the resources to carry out these studies. People they don't realize that the opposition has absolutely no resources in Parliament. This room we are in is the only room allocated to the opposition members of Parliament. This is the only room we have. So our resources are very limited. Whenever we do studies, it's always at our expense. And so I hope that the government is doing these studies, carrying out these studies, for us to have a better picture and for us to take the necessary decisions which need to be taken.
Thank you very much, Graham, for explaining everything so well. And I wish you the best of luck this year.
Thank you. And I take this opportunity to wish you and your family a happy and healthy 2025.
Thank you. Grazzi li segwitu ix-xandira illum l-ewwel waħda tas-sena l-ġdida mill-Parlament ta' Malta fil-Kamra tal-Oppożizzjoni. Illum tkellimna ma' Graham Bencini li huwa ix-Shadow Minister tal-Finanzi. Jekk tixtiequ segwu lil Graham Bencini bil-Malti, tistgħu segwuh fuq programmi oħra fuq Net TV bħal Net Live. Jekk tixtiequ tibatu xi kummenti, in-numru jidher fuq l-iskrin u tibatu l-kummenti bil-WhatsApp. Jiena Lea Hogg għal Net TV nixtieqilkom il-lejl it-tajjeb.